So before I get into tonight's official presentation, I want to talk you through some of the anomalies as we see them, because ultimately we are going to be asking the board to adopt a budget that does involve a supermajority. So some of the areas that we've been contending with this year actually stem back to last year. Last year we had a 0.58% levy, and that means that approximately 0.5% was the increase in levy to the taxpayers. And that has a little bit of a domino effect in that at the end of last year we didn't have fund balance for this year to put against the reserves to et cetera, to offset the levy. And that's a pretty significant factor. What I would ask the board to think about, and I know you have already, is when you see what we're presenting tonight and compare it to last year's levy, if we looked at those 2 years combined, we would be looking at about a 2.6% increase. So I would ask for your consideration, and like we do every year, is to not look at a budget for one single year, but look at the budgets over time and look at trends. And what you'll see with us tonight is that we're presenting a budget to you that will average out to 2.6% increase over the last 2 years. So we have the issue from last year, which was a super low levy. We also have new program this year that we're bringing to the board for consideration in the budget, and that's full day kindergarten. And it's really interesting. When I started thinking about full day kindergarten, I was certainly a supporter of it, but the more you get entrenched in it and see the data behind it, and today I spent the afternoon in a kindergarten class and watching what 2.75 hours looks like with kindergartners, the more it reinforces to me how important it is for our students in Pittsford. One of the things I believe we owe as a community to our students is the same access as other districts provide their students. So when you leave Pittsford and drive almost anywhere across the state of New York, you can go to the registrar and enroll in full day kindergarten. I will tell you that when we get people that register their children here and find out that we do not have full day kindergarten, it's a shock, and oftentimes they go somewhere else. When I think about Pittsford and the pride I have in Pittsford, and thinking about access, and thinking about giving our students an opportunity to not have a deficit in their learning after year one in kindergarten, I think we owe it to our students and our community to provide something as foundational as that for our young learners. So we have the levy last year, and we have full day K, which are two things that are a little bit different this year. We also have debt service this year coming on the books. And debt service came from a 2012 referendum for $43 million. And so for the last 5 years, we have been working on that project. That project entailed a lot to do with everything back from Sandy Hook, as we were making safety and security changes in our buildings, to things like quality of air, and changing the HVACs, the boilers, the infrastructure. Of that $43 million, $7 million of it was earmarked for the fields and for phys ed improvements. Part of what we need to do and feel good about is to make sure that we have adequate facilities and that we take care of them over time, and we've done a great job with that. But what makes this year an anomaly is that this is the year that the debt service comes on the books for us. We had a late state budget this year. Actually, I got a phone call a week before the budget saying, Mike, the budget runs are in. I will give them to you at 11 a.m. So I had Ronnie cancel my calendar so that we could begin processing. And then about an hour later, he said, we do not have a budget. So a lot of politics that were happening in Albany that finally yielded a budget Saturday morning of this week. That brings me to our fourth anomaly. We ended our last budget session with a 5.4% tax levy. with the goal to bring it down, and feeling really confident because when state aid came in, we were expecting at least $200,000. When the state aid runs came in this year, we received the lowest amount possible percentage-wise. So we received $74,000. After I received that number, I picked up the phone, called our legislators, expressed my disappointment, and had a conversation with them regarding bullet aid, which is a whole different story. But I was shocked that we received $74,000. Leading up to this, we did a lot of advocating with our legislators for more foundation aid and for more full-day kindergarten conversion aid, or to unfreeze the full-day conversion aid. And we received zero there. By show of hands, how many of you participated in advocacy in some way, shape, or form with our legislators? So look around. Just in this room, I would say over half, or about half of us, have worked with our legislators to get that done. So I also expressed my concern over the phone to our legislators, and I have a phone conference scheduled tomorrow. Again, to see what we can do offline with regards to some bullet aid possibly. In addition to those anomalies, we're also coming off a year where we cannot expect anything from the gap elimination. If you recall, that was the government's way of ending the GEA last year. And so we were stuck with a situation relative to aid where we are at the very lowest level. And I'm still scratching my head with regards to that. In addition to those, we also wanted to be cognizant about reserves. And we wanted to be cognizant about reserves, and you'll see that in our budget guidelines for fiscal sustainability. So the budget that I will present tonight will be a budget that does not impact students. You will not see elimination of programs. As a matter of fact, when all is said and done, you'll see an increase in personnel, especially at the elementary level, as it relates to full day K. So with all that said, and all the moving parts, I'm going to formally get into our budget adoption process or presentation. So the purpose of tonight really is to present my recommended budget to the Board of Education, and if they accept it, then the budget then transitions from me to the Board of Education owning the budget process. Also part of it is that we will acknowledge and hopefully approve the spending plan, which will require a supermajority vote or a tax cap override. And we'll approve the tax report card. Our budget guidelines are something that we really had to look carefully at this year. Our budget guidelines are guidelines to help us get through years where the budgets are bad or years when the budgets are really good. And this year, it was a year when we had a real tough budget season. And so when presenting the budget that we're presenting tonight, this became our guiding light. And when I say our guiding light, that means it became the district planning team's guiding principles. And our district planning team consists of parents with kids, parents without kids in the district. And then basically every other unit is represented within the district. And we create these budget guidelines, the board approve the budget guidelines, and then we use these to make decisions along the way. So the budget that you'll see tonight is absolutely a student-based budget. You'll see that there is a continuance of our belief in providing high-quality professional development for all of our staff. And you'll also see the work that's been done for the last 5 sessions, including tonight, that shows the management of the impact of taxes, the levy, as it relates to the community, while at the same time maintaining our excellence in all we do. You'll also see parts in the budget where we're able to provide fiscal stability in the future. And part of that, just to begin, is having that understanding that while we're going to be asking for a 4-point-something% levy, that's atypical. So I want you to think back to averaging the last 2 years or 3 years or 4 years or 5 years. But knowing that the use of reserves, where we see ourselves in the future, puts ourselves in a really good position for future budgets. As we look and create budgets, we're always, just like teachers that are in here, look at their lessons plans and think about have the end in mind. What is it that they want to accomplish? And that is to maintain excellence in all areas. It's to maintain excellence in academics, social, emotional areas, and also do it in a financially responsible manner. So as we began this whole process, and again with all the moving parts, which was months ago, several months ago, we looked at budget, anyone that owned a budget, and asked them to begin looking at areas where there may be efficiencies that are also aligned to these principles. So what's changed since our last work session? So our last work session, we ended at 5.4, and what our hope was to bring that number down below 5 and not use reserves, and also align our practices with the budget guidelines. And so some of the things that we've done to get there, and I'm glad we put it in a 1 font, is that we looked at things like district-wide travel and conference, something where we could reduce it, but at the same time not impact classrooms or kids. Same with curriculum writing and professional development. While it was reduced, you'll see in a minute, it was also earmarked in a different area. Remove the teacher center contingency. Every year we budget for the teacher center, and our teacher center is the area that we actually do our own professional development. It's robust, it's targeted, it's high quality, and one of the positive things that came out of the state budget is they didn't pull that out. So when we saw the budget had that in there, we were able to take it out, and that was close to $50,000. Athletics, chaperones and supplies, that's chaperones for some away games, and supplies and equipment that I've been working with our athletic director, knowing that our booster clubs will also play a role in supporting any additional needs that we at this point feel aren't necessary. We looked at our copy clerks across the district and ways to reallocate our support staff where that can still happen without paying someone to do it separate. Part of looking at our schedule this year at the elementary level was acknowledging the fact that this is the 3rd year in a row that our 4th and 5th grade science teachers have had different levels of minutes of instruction. And at the same time understanding that the move we did this year took a little bit more away from ELA and math. And so we're going from 3 times a week for science to 2 times a week in science. Our BOCES speech teachers are three teachers that we literally purchased through BOCES. We are now going to hire our own speech teachers, which will yield an $86,000 savings. The paraprofessionals really, and many of these aren't cuts, they're more reductions based on enrollment or students that are coming to us. We believe that we're going to have at least 4 students who no longer need a CSE assigned aid. So when a student's IEP has on it that they need a 1-to-1 aid, we have to put a 1-to-1 aid with him or her. This year, going into the year, we know that we're going to be at minimum 4 down from that. We reallocated general fund items from some title funds. We had rollover from the funds that we hadn't used before, and so we were able to take those funds and put them into the general budget and assign codes to them, and that yielded about $140,000 savings. We added Pittsford Youth back into the budget, and Pittsford Youth Services is an area that we have identified as needing more support relative to mental health and counseling and social work type work. And then the last is a miscellaneous area that involves benefits related to some of the changes. And that brought us to about $602,000. And that $602,000 brought us from the 5.4 down to the 4.7 range. I'm going to ask Darren now to kind of go over some of the figures to help you make sense of where we are at this point, and then ultimately ask the board to adopt the budget as presented.
Very similar to what you saw at the last meeting, but a quick look at the progression, and we've had so many meetings that I kind of did this from the standpoint of picking it up where we were last time. So in the beginning of time, back in early February, we were looking at a budget that was almost 6.4% increase on the budget. And you can see the progression of the blue lines there going down, including what you just heard about, over $3 million worth of efficiencies and reductions, reduced the appropriation line. To the right-hand side, you see the blue line spiking up. That's with the implementation of the full day K cost. So from this point forward, when we talk about the budget, unlike previously, we're talking about what I call the all-in budget. It has the debt service and it has the full day K included in there. So compared to last time, when we were just talking about the base budget, we got it down to I'm going to round it off, 3.9%. And that was about $370,000 above the tax cap. We needed to add in almost $3.9 million worth of costs for the implementation year of full day K to bring the total budget to $134,229,854. It's an $8.7 million increase, or 6.95% on the appropriation standpoint. And the red bars show where we needed to be if we were at the cap. So the difference on the far right between the top of the red bar and the top of the blue would be your override portion. Same kind of information on the tax levy standpoint. And some people may ask, well, how come the numbers and the adjustments don't match from one page to the other? Well, because we're looking at the revenue side. So there's some things that affect the revenue side that we've done that don't affect the appropriation side, and vice versa. So we started out at almost a 6.5% projected levy, and that was just on the base budget back in early February. And then the last meeting we were at was at 3.1. We bring in the full day K costs, and then it's 4.73 compared to a tax cap of 2.72. So it's a little over $1.9 million difference between the tax cap and the proposed levy to support the all-in budget. Based on some new information that we did receive, the tax cap did reduce about $6,000. It was very nominal, but there is a slight change there. So taking a little bit deeper dive, but what I'm trying to do here with the full day K is to show you the cost and also where the support for it and how it affects the tax levy. So on the left-hand side, there's the appropriations, and we have over $1.7 million worth of salaries and benefits for almost 20 teachers and paraprofessionals. There's what I call the non-tax revenue in the middle column there. That represents the full day conversion aid. If our enrollments are higher than what we're projecting, that will go up slightly. If they're lower, that'll go down a little bit, but then hopefully so will the expenditure side. So the net impact on the levy then would be $1 million in the third column. Supplies and materials, a little over $300,000. We've used up all of that full day K conversion aid, so there's nothing to offset that, so that's going to the tax levy. Contractual and BOCES, same kind of thing, $230,000 going to the levy. Then we get into what we call the capital items. And these are, if you remember from the fund balance work we did last time, these are our one-time costs associated with this. So we have some things that we need to do to our buildings to get ready to receive these students. We want to address some parking shortages at Allen Creek, Mendon Center, and Park Road. And so to do that, if the voters were to approve this budget, they're also approving us to take money from the capital reserve to pay for this cost, so there would be no tax levy impact for that cost. Same thing for the buses. Because we'll have more students coming in the morning bus run and going home at night, we need 5 additional buses, or 5 additional bus routes, I should say. But the costs for the drivers and the fuel, et cetera, We're actually seeing that as a savings because we're not having to run the midday runs. And that actually was used to help reduce the costs of the program. But again, we'll be asking for permission from the voters to take money from the bus purchase reserve, and should this budget pass, we have the authorization to do that, so there's no tax levy impact. So against the almost $3.9 million in costs, we have $2.3 million in non-tax support for the program, and that leaves a little over $1.5 million worth of costs that are going into the tax levy for local support, which is substantially less than what we've been projecting the last 2 years or so. Taking a look at the all-in budget, as we normally do from what we call object of expense, or as the comptroller calls it, just looking at the various areas, and I've highlighted in yellow the areas that would be significantly impacted by full day K, for example. So, for example, last time when you saw this information, you might recall that salaries was about a little over 2% increase. It's higher now because of bringing in those costs with the full day K. But you can see the fluctuations through there. The salaries and benefits, again, full day K is a big driver there. A lot of the reductions, over $3 million worth of reductions we've been able to do affected the benefits and helped to bring that down. I know we've had a lot of discussion about the health consortium and how the rates went up this year. It's kind of early to say for sure, but so far for the current year, the trend is much better, and we don't have the high cost claimants that we did the year before. However, history shows that spring tends to be the high use periods for the insurance, so time will tell. Contractual and tuitions, we have some students now going to state schools, and we need to pay for those costs. BOCES, there actually was some savings there, both a combination of getting out of the speech pathologist service, as well as some other factors that we were able to do. Supplies and materials, that's been staying pretty stable. Debt service, that's the debt coming on, as Mike mentioned, from the referendum. And that's on target with what we projected back in 2012. And you'll see in a moment that there is some building aid that offsets a good portion of that, and that was forecast as well. Interfund transfers, that is what we just saw, almost $1.6 million to pay for the buses and the improvements to the buildings, as well as our cost that we need to transfer into the special aid fund for summer students with disabilities program that goes to the state. We had to increase that a little bit. So all in, $8.7 million increase, 6.95%. Then, as we normally do, this is a summary, if you will, from what we call the program services budget. It's just taking the budget numbers and sorting them the way the district likes to look at them. A good amount goes into the schools, and you see a pretty big increase there of almost 5%. Again, that's the full day K coming on. Central student services, it's pretty flat. Slight decrease in the instructional services. Support services, 0.15%. And maybe I should go back. The schools includes everything from the teachers, direct instruction to the students, the administrator's office, special education services right in the buildings, technology, etc. Central student services would be special education office, student services office, the Pittsford Youth Services Program, for example, that you just saw, and the services to support the health and welfare services within the buildings and for our private schools. So one interesting nuance there is for students attending private schools within our district, we bill the districts of residence, and vice versa. They bill us if we have our students going into their districts. That's also charged in that area. And that seems to be an area lately of a lot of movement back and forth. Instructional services, that would be the ASI's office, professional development, standards leaders, teacher center, things of that nature, supports for the education of the teachers. Support services are everything under my area, transportation, finance and business office, and operations and maintenance. Also within that is human resources, public information, and what we call, or the state calls, administrative technology. So any technology infrastructure that's not directly in the classroom. Central administration is the superintendent's office, And unallocated expenses, that's a strange name that the state has come up with, but basically those are things that all of the areas of the budget help drive, but they're not allocated directly to it because of the nature of what they are. And they are things like general liability insurance, legal fees, the debt service on whatever we build or construction, as well as the benefits that support all the people that are paid in all of these areas. So that's why you don't see any FTEs or full-time equivalents for the staffing. Looking at the staffing, the budget a year ago, when you adopted the 16-17 budget, was budgeted for, I'm gonna round it off to 1,106 employees, full-time equivalent employees. This budget, even after adding the additional speech language pathologists and full day K, is 1,112. So the net effect, we did have some substantial efficiencies there. Revenue gives you a 5-year history as well as the projected 2017-18 budget. And the property tax levy is $99,810,000. It's a $4.5 million increase, or 4.73%. The state aid looks rather attractive compared to the $74,000 that we've been talking about. The big drivers there are the full day K conversion aid is factored in there now, as well as the building aid. So once you back both of those numbers out of that increase, we're only looking at about $230,000 worth of state aid for all the various categorical aids that are out there. Sales tax is trending up, so we adjusted for that a little bit. Hopefully that continues. I think we all know that interest earnings are not anything to write home about. Miscellaneous revenue, it's a whole bunch of many small things. Probably the biggest item within that is the BOCES refund. BOCES every year, basically, when I used to work for BOCES, I used to say we have to go out of business. They have to basically make their revenues and expenses balance, and if there's any surplus, it goes back to all the component districts and they start all over again. Last year, there was a pretty substantial surplus that they had that came back to the districts. It doesn't look like that's going to happen for this year. Fund balance and reserves, pretty substantial increase, 75% for this year. A major factor in that is what we talked about with the almost $1.6 million being used from the reserves to help pay for the full day K costs. Other than that, it's pretty much the same things that we've used in the past, the $1.5 million worth of fund balance and about $700,000 from reserves to pay for things like, the biggest of which is the employee benefits accrued liability reserve. When people leave the district, contractually, we might be obligated to pay them unused vacation days, for example. So rather than charging that to the budget, we have a reserve that helps pay for that. Foundation aid. Why talk about it? Because it's a problem, bottom line. It's the basic form of aid to schools, and it's supposed to support all schools. And the reason I talk about it is because, and you'll see in the chart here in a minute, back in 2006-07, the state actually lost a lawsuit that was brought forth by the Campaign for Fiscal Equity, and the Supreme Court said that the state's funding formula was not adequate and the distribution method was not equitable, and they said that what the state was doing was unconstitutional. Then Governor Spitzer came up with a formula that said schools will know 4 years in advance what their aid will be, and it increased the levels. Unfortunately, that didn't really materialize. So all schools have a real problem when they don't know each year, and this year is a good indicator of that, especially with the late budget. We didn't know what our state aid picture was going to be. So this chart gives you a quick snapshot on that. And if you look at the 2008 year, and after that you see some increases. That's when the foundation aid formula started. And then we had the stock market crash, so that's when it was introduced that they're going to freeze foundation aid and you won't get any more than you got the year before. The hard part about that was the aid was no longer tied to enrollment either. So a district like us, we've had some declining enrollment, but not significant compared to some districts throughout the state, and they're impervious to that as far as from a state aid standpoint, or districts that have growing enrollment. They're not seeing growth in their foundation aid because of it. Then the state introduced what they called the gap elimination adjustment, and that's why the blue bars are going down. And then over time, they slowly went up. The second bar from the right, that's for the current year, and that's when the gap elimination adjustment was eliminated. So the governor called that a record increase when you see the increase between the two bars. However, if you look all the way to the left, our aid is very similar to what it was 9 years ago. So it really wasn't an increase, it was just getting us back to where we were. So all in, we're talking $74 million. Maybe that's where you got it from.
There it is.
I found your $74 million. The governor has it. So if we had been funded at formula, we'd have $74 million more aid to work with. So translating that to, based on our previous data and estimating what that means to an average taxpayer, it'd be over $4,000 more in taxes the taxpayers have had to pay because of that. And the reason I bring that up is foundation aid comes directly from your income taxes. This wonderful time of year when you're doing those forms and you gotta fill out the code for your school district, that's why they have you do that. So they know what the average income is in your school district, what your property value is in the school district, and that's what drive the aid or how they do the formulas. I don't think any of us have been able to say to the state, I'm invoking a gap elimination adjustment, so I'm reducing my tax bill by $500. So you're paying the money, but it's not coming back. One of the legal requirements we have tonight is should you adopt the budget within 24 hours, we have to go online and submit this form. It's called the Property Tax Report Card. It's a lot of information on there, but it's everything that you've already seen. What it's doing is it's informing the state what our budget is for the current year, what we are projecting it will be for next year, or what you adopt, and then what tax levy we would need in order to make that work. And it goes through the formula a little bit to show that we are requesting an override of about $1.9 million. So that's how the state will know that we're seeking an override. The bottom chart is, as we've discussed in our treasurer's reports and also back in September, it's our actual audited fund balance and reserve balances, and then we have to project what we think we're going to be as of June 30th, 2017. So that you have that information, I believe, for the adoption as part of the resolution. If you do adopt the budget, we're asking for your permission to approve this so we can submit it. Contingent budget, one of the common questions that I get, what is a contingent budget? And basically, should this proposed budget not pass by the voters, you have an option. You can go straight to contingent budget, you can put forth another budget. And that budget can be whatever you want it to be. Some schools have gone out higher, some have gone lower, some have done the exact same budget. If the voters say no a second time, you have to go to contingent. There's no choice. The contingent budget is no longer based on a permissible growth factor. Up until the tax cap, it was a certain percentage of CPI that the budget could increase, and it wasn't tied to the levy standpoint. Now, contingent budget is tied to the tax levy, and the tax levy can't be any more than it was the year before. Your budget number can be whatever you want. If you can make it stay within that tax levy, you can do whatever. So in our case, we would have a zero increase to our tax levy, and considering that our tax levy is about 76% of our total budget, that's pretty big revenue hit. So we would lose that $4.5 million worth of revenue just from that alone. Then if you think about it, if the voters said no to the budget, they would also be saying no to using those reserves to help fund full day K. So a lot of that non-tax revenue would be gone. So really keeping full day K in there would not be very feasible because you'd only have about $700,000 worth of conversion aid to offset the costs. And you've already got the $6.8 million funding problem. So if full day K came out, there still would be about a $3 million adjustment, whether it be reductions, use of fund balance, or some combination thereof to make that budget balance. The other common question is, what does this mean to me, the taxpayer? What's it going to cost? And I would love to be able to say with certainty what it would cost. The problem is to calculate the tax rate, there's about 6 variables involved with doing that, and at this point in time, we only know one of them. The remainder we won't know until July and August. And actually, the state recommends that we not project the tax rate and publicize it because of that volatility. And with the way Albany's been lately, I have some concerns. We have some unusual things going on right now. We have a town that's in the process of doing a revaluation. We have a large payment in lieu of taxes coming off of that and returning to the tax rolls, so we don't know for sure what that assessment's gonna be. But after looking at 9 years worth of assessment history and looking at the trends of how it's changed and trying to take some averages, we're giving a conservative estimate here. And the base budget, without the full day K, is projected to be about a $136 increase for somebody that owns a $250,000 home, which is about average for our area, and is eligible for the basic star exemption. Full day K would add another $95, so we're looking at about $231 for that average home here in Pittsford to support this budget. So I wish I could say that that was definite, but I guarantee it will change. Hopefully it'll be lower. So looking at what we call the composite true value tax rate, and what that is taking the tax rate and combining it for all of the towns within our district. The rate has averaged about 1.6% increase each year, and right there it shows what the actual rates are. So we're projecting $26.55, $26.56 for the 17-18 year over the $25.51 that we have for the current year. If we project it out, that orange bar is the projection if we stayed with that 1.6% per year and then adjusted it for 17-18 for those unusual factors that we know about, such as the debt service and the full day K, you can see that that is actually below the line. And to be honest with you, when we estimated the tax rate at this time for this current budget, we estimated $25.75 and it came out $25.51. So it's actually lower than the previous year's tax rate. Looking at some more trend information that helps us do some projecting and make sure that we're on target with our future projections. Looking at the budget of the appropriation side, this goes back looking at the previous years, and we've averaged 2.5% over that period of time, and it's 2.4% since the tax cap has been around. And that's kind of an important number to remember for the next phase of what we're going to talk about. Looking at the tax levy trend, a lot more volatile, a lot more movement there, and that's a factor of the state aid. And last year, as Mike was talking about, 0.58% of the tax levy, unusually low. And so that formulates a very low base to work off for as we move into this next budget season. But overall, 2.5% has been what our tax levy change has averaged per year. So looking at that from a budget perspective, blue bars being what we actually have encountered, except for the right-hand bar would be projected for 17-18, the budget before you. And the orange bar is taking that and factoring in that 2.5% constant increase plus the debt service and implementing a $3.9 million new program. And so we're right on target, or actually a little below what we would have projected if we were sitting here 9 years ago and said, what does this look like? Same type of thing for the tax levy. The orange bars represent what we've actually done. The blue is the projection. And you can see that for the 16-17 year, it's substantially below that projection amount. And then it spikes up, but it's still below the projection amount. So this is what Mike was talking about as far as looking at it for the long haul, just like you would your investment portfolio. So the bottom line is, had we stayed on that trend, and what taxpayers were expecting when the tax cap originally came out and it wasn't so volatile, we'd have about $1.8 million more revenue to work with today. And contrast that to the $1.55 million that Full Day K is adding. For all intents and purposes, we would have been able to implement Full Day K without overriding the tax cap. Factor in the added impact of $4 million, or actually more than $4 million, less state aid than we should be getting, and that's substantial relief to the taxpayers that's not there. Moving on from the budget, there will be another proposition this year, as there has been in the past, for the purchase of 12 buses to replace these buses, just like we have many years for decades. About $1.3 million. There is a trade-in allowance that will reduce that. It's an up to amount. If the bids come in substantially lower than that, we don't have to spend all that. We don't have to pull all that money out of the reserves. But we're asking for the voters to withdraw money from the savings account or the reserve, whichever you want to call it, to be able to pay for these buses. We are not asking to levy an additional tax. Whether this passes or not does not have any impact on the tax levy. However, the board policy is to try to replace buses every 10 years or 100,000 and or 100,000 miles. All of these buses are at that point. And we found that once they go substantially beyond that mark, our maintenance costs go up exponentially. There is state aid that will be generated on the purchase of these buses, and it is in this budget, in the governor's budget, or state budget, excuse me. So that money, about $900,000, would be used to help replenish the use of the reserve, and that's how we help keep it moving for many years into the future. So don't get this confused. Some schools are out there asking to levy an additional tax to buy their buses. That's not what we're doing. That's just the legalese of what you'll see in the vote. So trying to bring it to a close, some key points. The proposed budget before you for your consideration is a 6.95% increase, and that's with full day K and everything in there. The estimated tax levy to support that after the state aid is 4.73%. It will require a supermajority for it to pass, which means 60% of the voters, because it is exceeding the property tax cap. Based on what I've seen so far in the new state budget, because we override the tax cap, the star credit or rebate, they call it both ways, will not be eligible for that. People will still get the star exemption, but not the rebate check. However, after looking at that, it looks like there's a sliding scale, so to speak, on income. And if you look at what our average income is in our district, only about 13% of it is what they would get. So if I remember correctly, I think it was around $70. It's not as much as it was the year before. The estimated tax increase is $1.05. We're being very conservative with that, which equates about 4.1%. So on an average home that gets the basic star exemption, about $230, $231 would be the projected tax increase. Contingent budget would be $127.4 million and would require about $6.8 million worth of cuts, or once we pulled full day K out, an additional $3 million worth of measures to try to get it to balance. So this is what you have before you for your consideration when it's time to take action. You also have it in your packet. What I wanted to draw your attention to that's different about it from previous years is we have to be very specific in the resolution that we're seeking a property tax cap override. I've had this looked at by the attorney and the comptroller's office, and they have approved it. The other part is to get approval to approve the property tax report card, as you saw earlier. So only two things left compared to when we started a few months ago. We have the public hearing, which is a legally required hearing, and we have to present the budget in a format that's similar across the state, and that's on May 8th, and that'll be right here. And then on May 16th at the gymnasium at Barker Road Middle School is the actual budget vote. This presentation will momentarily be up on the district's website. And you can find all the other presentations and a plethora of other information there. And we'll open it up to your questions and comments.
Does anyone on the board have any questions for Dan, Mike? Anyone? I'd just like to make a comment. I just want to thank you, Darren and Leanne and Mike and everybody else, our principals and all our administrators who've gone through the budget so carefully. We really appreciate all the work, and I think we've come a long ways from where we started, and I think we have a really good budget, and I'm happy that we have full day kindergarten in there. So thank you, all your work.
So for your consideration is the 2017 and 2018 proposed budget for adoption.
May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.